Right, well, thank you so much for having me. I'm here to talk about a new initiative a new-ish initiative that we've been working on over the last 12 months that we're super excited about. So I want to talk a little bit about the unmet need and the reason that we decided that this was something that we really wanted to pursue as MS Australia and the peak body for MS in the country. Essentially, our unmet need, our greatest unmet need, I think, is treatment for progressive MS. So we do have a number of therapies that are available for people with MS, of course you know that, but none of the therapies that we currently have actually help with repair or neuroprotection in progressive MS. So around 15% of people that are diagnosed with MS will start with the progressive form of MS, but really overall, around 40% of people live with progressive MS in the end. So we recently did, in conjunction with the Menzies, a new count of the number of people living with MS in Australia, and it's now just over 33,000 people. But we do think that means that we have just over 13,000 people living with progressive MS at the moment. So, as I said, we really have nothing to offer this group of people in terms of repair and neuroprotection. And from our perspective, and I'm sure from your perspective, we urgently need to test new therapies for people living with progressive disease. Traditional clinical trials, while they are wonderful, and the associated drug approvals, if they work, can take up to 10 to 20 years. And really, we need to identify safe and effective treatments that slow progression for people with MS now. So we've decided to invest in a different type of clinical trial, which we've called Platypus. So in the great tradition, as Bruce also mentioned, of using acronyms that have got nothing to do with the words that are the heading of the trial, we've called a platform adaptive trial for remyelination, using the Y in remyelination, and neuroprotection in multiple sclerosis. This is a pioneering trial that is a multi-arm, multi-stage adaptive clinical design, which I'll explain in a minute. Essentially what it does is it allows us to generate robust results more quickly and more cheaply. The trial of selecting the drugs and the trial outcome measures is still a rigorous and systematic way of testing drugs for people with MS. But it allows us to have enhanced confidence in positive trial outcomes and their rapid translation into clinical practice. So this multi-arm, multi-stage trial allows us to run multiple drug candidates alongside each other and assess them against standard of care. So in a traditional clinical trial setting, you usually have standard of care running along, and then you introduce one new treatment to see whether or not it improves outcomes for the participants. The Platypus design allows us to run multiple arms alongside the standard of care, which means that we have faster results, essentially. It requires less time, fewer participants, and the beauty of the trial is we're allowed to do analysis at midpoints. So if we have arms that are unpromising, they look like they're not working, we're able to drop them, and we can use our efforts, resources, time, money to incorporate new treatment arms that we think might work. So this is really not something that we do in traditional clinical trial designs. You have to go all the way to the end, even if you really have an inkling at the middle stage perhaps that things are not working, you actually can't stop there or change unless it's dangerous. So you have to go all the way to the end. This actually allows us to switch in the event that something is not working. So supports the redirection of resources and avoids the lengthy setup times, because we do have these people that run along on their standard of care that we can use to compare to everything else. So here it is in pictorial form. So we have our control or placebo group along the top in orange. These are the people that are receiving their standard therapies. So a beauty of this design is you don't have to go off the medications that you are already on if you are in fact being treated for your MS. And in this hypothetical example, you can see treatment 1 is running alongside treatment 2. Treatment 1 looks like it's not working, so you do an interim analysis at the end of stage 1 and it gets dropped. But treatment 2 does look like it's working, so it continues along in comparison to that orange line of standard of care. But that droppment of treatment 1 means that we can pick up something called treatment 3 and run it again against that orange line. So we can, with unlimited funding and scope, we can in fact do a whole bunch of different clinical trials kind of alongside each other. It's like a multiplication factor. So we're starting with 2 neuroprotective and repair agents to be used, as I said, as an add-on therapy to the current treatments that people might be on. So the treatments that people are on are likely to be the ones that quieten down the immune system, and what we're trying to do here is either enhance the ability of the brain to protect itself from damage or to potentially repair damage that's been done. The repurposed drugs that we're going to test are metformin and alpha-lipoic acid, and I'll just stop here and say the other really exciting thing about this trial is the fact that they are repurposed drugs. So repurposed drugs are drugs that have already been in use in people for other conditions. So it means we can completely skip over the step that Bruce was talking about, where we test the phase 1 step, where we test to see if it's safe in humans, because we already know it's safe in humans because we're using it for other things. So metformin is used extensively for diabetes, and alpha-lipoic acid is a supplement, actually. And so, again, the design allows the use of the repurposed drugs, and the design of the trial means we're just speeding everything up. So this is an international effort. The Australian sites that I'll talk about in a sec are integrated with an international study called Octopus, which you may have heard of, so hence the platypus. And so we are mirroring everything that they're doing in the UK, and it will allow us to leverage their very large-scale trial. So we'll be adding Australians to this trial, but they've already got their trial up and running. But basically boost their recruitment and allow us to have better power to see differences because we've got greater numbers. We will combine all of our personnel and financial resources with those of the UK team, so it's super efficient, which simply means more robust results faster. So our consumer involvement, as it was a consumer day, it's actually been quite groundbreaking, the consumer involvement in the Octopus design. They were consulted all the way along in terms of the design of the study and the design of how it would work and who could be involved. We did our own consumer involvement or consultation piece with Australians living with progressive MS. So you can see there we had 104 Australians with progressive MS that we surveyed, and found that they felt very similarly to their counterparts in the UK. And some of the things that came out of the consumer involvement was that we would like to see, or people living with MS would like to see, a greater EDSS range included in the trial. So that is one of the ways that we measure disability in MS, and it's a number. And essentially, people that have a higher level of disability are often excluded from clinical trials because of that very high level of disability. Platypus and Octopus are going to include people across a wider range of that disability spectrum so that they can have access to these treatments. Another important point that we got from the consumer involvement was the higher upper limit of age. So often clinical trials will not be done on people who are above 60 or 65, depending on the trial. we are going to be taking people up to 70 years old, which sounds small but actually is pretty groundbreaking. They really don't do this. Also, the determination of measurements and how they are taken. So would you prefer to come into the hospital for lots of little visits or one massive visit? What can we do at home? What do we actually need you in the clinic for? What kinds of measurements would be most comfortable for the participants, but in fact give us the same amount of information as scientists? So in terms of how we do the measurements, very, very heavily consulted. And then I've said that down the bottom, fewer but longer visits to site. So as much at home as possible, but when they come in for a long period of time and we cover as much as we can. So there's less back and forth. So really in the design, key things that were important to people with progressive MS, which in the end just makes it a friendlier trial to be part of and helps with everybody staying in the trial and making sure that you're getting the best results possible. So platypus implementation, where are we now? So we have been on this journey now for probably about a year, and we are looking at starting the trial in 10 sites across Australia, including in Hobart with Bruce. Our scientific planning is underway. It is not a small undertaking to try and start a clinical trial, particularly with repurposed drugs. But we are expecting that we will have our first participants enrolled by the end of this year. We launched it at the MS Australia conference last year, and people were very pleased to hear about it. And so we have also been trying to capture everybody's enthusiasm and interest via the MS Australia website. So if you were a person that was interested in being part of the platypus clinical trial, I would urge you to go to the link at the bottom of the screen there and register your interest. And once we're open and running, we will be contacting people to tell them how they can be part of it. So we're still planning, but we're getting quite close, and I'm thrilled. I think this is going to be a really important initiative going forward. The idea being that as more funding or fundraising occurs, that we'll be able to add more treatment arms and test more things, including new novel things in addition to the repurposed therapies. So the dream is that this is a long-term platform that really allows us to do as much as we can in terms of the treatment space for people with progressive MS. Thank you.